Welcome. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where our services and programs take place, the people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. My name is Carol and I'm employed by Casey Cardinia Libraries, and I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's event, Anxiety and Natural Solutions. Tonight's presenter is Emma Tippett, who's the owner of and principal naturopath at Empowered Health. Emma has over 10 years' experience and a sincere and heartfelt determination to support her patients to discover their optimal state of health and well-being. Emma has supported many patients to understand their anxiety and encourages a holistic approach to managing this condition, paired with a personal desire to find balance within, realizing that anxiety can take many shapes and forms. Emma has combined personal experience with clinical evidence-based practice to continue to share her knowledge and support others in their healing. In tonight's seminar, Emma will cover many areas related to anxiety, including gut health, hormonal balance, adrenal health and the impacts of prolonged stress, how genes can play a role, nutrition, lifestyle, including movement and mindfulness, herbal medicine, and nutritional supplements. It is with pleasure I hand over to Emma.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm so happy to be here this evening, and thank you to all the participants that have joined us tonight. So based on my presentation tonight, I really hope that what will happen is that you'll have a greater understanding of the experience of anxiety, the many different driving factors or contributing factors that can influence this presentation, and walk away feeling a little bit more empowered so that you can move through your life a little less with a little less anxiety, and perhaps look at some things that potentially you could follow up. There's an ongoing struggle with anxiety, and you know, some people may find that the more conventional methods may or may not be helping them. So what I like to encourage is a holistic approach to the management of anxiety, but first it needs to come down to the understanding of the individual and how this person, what this person might need to be thinking about in terms of the factors that are affecting or impacting the experience of anxiety in their body. I absolutely, it's a huge passion of mine, this area of health. I do a lot of work around gut health as well, and hormonal health for women. So I see a lot of women in my clinic. But anxiety is so common, and I think it's, you know, after the last couple of years, we've definitely been facing different types of stresses in our lives that perhaps our poor nervous systems haven't encountered, but our modern way of living is really quite stimulatory for our nervous system anyway. And if you pair that with a predisposition or other imbalances that are going on, no wonder it sort of compounds into a big issue for people. So I'm going to share my screen now, and I have a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to go through each slide and talk. Whoops, sorry, I'm going to go back. Oh no, hang on a second. I'm going to have to start that again, ladies. I clicked a little bit too quickly through that. Just give me one sec. Oh, hang on a second. Sorry. We need to start that from the beginning. Sorry. We're going to start that again from the beginning. Here we go. All right. We're on. So Anxiety, a functional holistic understanding of contributing factors with practical and natural solutions. And the beautiful thing about natural medicine is that we're naturopaths, one of our main goals is to look at the contributing factors to all health issues that a person or individual may be experiencing. So we can work at supporting those contributing factors while also working on the symptomatic expression of those particular problems. So first, I'm going to go through all of the dry parts of tonight. So the pathophysiology. So I want to give you a little bit of a background in what's potentially going on in the brain, in the central nervous system. So keep up with me. Definitely at the end, if you have any questions, we can go through those. So anxiety disorders are associated with an imbalance of activity in the hippocampus and the amygdala, which are the emotional centers of the brain. The amygdala activates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, so the HPA axis, and is responsible for the expression of fear, aggression, or defensive behavior. Together, the amygdala and the hippocampus are involved in retrieval of both emotional and fear-related memories. So chronic HPA axis activation, so this part of the brain, stimulates the nervous system cells and they move into a pro-inflammatory state, okay? So once in this state, the microglia, which are the nervous system cells, generate pro-inflammatory cytokines, increase oxidative stress, and amplify glutamate levels. So long-term activation in this way, so microgliosis, leads to enlargement of the amygdala and shrinkage of the hippocampus. So it's one of those things that the more you use a pathway in the body, there's more focus on that, the larger this thing becomes. So this sympathetic dominance becomes like a dominant aspect in the central nervous system. So the shrinkage of the hippocampus and reduction of serotonin levels, these are the things that we see from a pathological point of view that trigger the presentation of the symptomatic anxiety in the body. Decreased GABA signaling and increased excitatory neurotransmission by glutamate also underlie this experience of anxiety in the body. So that is like from a physiological point of view, what's going on. So sometimes it can be helpful to understand that, but I think what we really need to highlight is that there are many causes of what does this to the central nervous system. Okay, so it's not often there's not one answer. It can be a combination of physiological responses, imbalances in the body with emotional responses, trauma-associated responses, things that trigger us emotionally and trigger this pathway in the central nervous system. So if you have experienced anxiety, you may have experienced some of these types of things or witnessed them in a loved one. So there's going to be potential, and this is, it's not all of the things that you might experience. It's just a collection of things that can be quite common, both physically, psychologically, and, in terms of how that manifests behaviorally. So physically, we can see changes in weight. So some people I found will tend to lose weight when they are anxious. Other people might find that they put weight on, depending on, how this presentation of anxiety impacts their appetite and the things that they crave. We may see issues with sleep disturbance, which I'm going to go into the potential, like the contributing factors or what's going on in terms of the drivers of anxiety in later slides. So sleep disturbances, so you might find it more difficult to get to sleep. You might wake a lot. You might have a 5 a.m. wake up time. It's all very common. Insomnia, another one very common with anxiety. We can also see changes in energy, so fatigue, shortness of breath or shallow breathing. You can have some chest or body pains, impacts of libido, digestive symptoms. So some people might find that they have more IBS-related symptoms or loose bowel motions, numbness, tingling, headaches, heart palpitations. So these, I mean, that's not everything, but it's definitely a list of some of the more common feelings that might be felt in the body with anxiety. Obviously, there can be psychological manifestations, like feeling teary, constantly worrying, or finding that your mind tends to get stuck on certain things, or I think in cognitive behavioral therapy they call it catastrophization. So we're taking a situation and we're blowing it up into the worst case scenario. Mood swings, irritability, lack of concentration, feeling like you can't make decisions, feeling overwhelmed, or it may actually tip into panic. So things like panic attacks can happen, or a feeling of panic. Behaviorally, we might see withdrawal from family and friends, relying on certain substances to self-medicate with, psychomotor agitation, so constant pacing or tapping, feeling more dependent on others, decreasing ability to feel like you can take care of yourself properly, and avoidance of anxiety-provoking circumstances. So, as I said, not an exhaustive list, but just a list of some of the things that can be common. Okay, so some key drivers. So this is where I find, if we think about anxiety and we're doing like a mind map, these are some of the things that we could kind of, well, we're investigating to see if these situations are relevant for this particular person and how much these particular things are actually driving their experience of anxiety in their body. So there's definitely certain testing that I'm going to discuss a little bit later on that can look at some of these issues. And I think it's important, again, and this isn't my area of specialty, of course, but the emotional and psychological factors are very important to address. And these might be things that are very apparent for one person's manifestation of anxiety, but then for another person, it might be a little bit less of those things and more of some of the physical aspects. So I'm going to go through, if we think of a mind map, I'm going to go through all the different things that I like to look at or question around when I'm doing a case history for someone that is presenting with anxiety or coming for that sort of support. So blood sugar regulation is really important. So inadequate glucose supply. The amygdala function is dependent on an adequate glucose supply. So recurrent low blood sugar can increase noradrenaline transmission in the amygdala, and it can create some anxiety symptoms. So we want to look at, for this person, are they skipping meals? Are they not having breakfast, or skipping meals because they're too busy? And this I've seen a little bit more of with some of the, health choices made around intermittent fasting. So intermittent fasting can be great for many reasons in the right circumstances. I do find that if we have a patient that is more prone to anxiety and their body actually needs stabilization to, as you can see, give an adequate glucose supply to these parts of the brain, then intermittent fasting might actually be a little detrimental for this type of person when they're in this state. So getting stabilization back in the body by having regular meals and the right type of nutrition, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is really important. Another area that I like to check off is what's going on with this person's thyroid. Is it possible that they are tipping into a hypothyroid state, which is an overfunction of the thyroid? So this is definitely something to look into. Anxiety and mood changes are clinical manifestations of persistent elevated levels of free T4 and free T3. So the thing with this is as well, though, that when a person has anxiety as a prolonged presentation or increased high cortisol, you may actually see that that can cause an overactivation of the thyroid. Or it may be the other way around, where the overfunction of the thyroid is something that's driving the anxiety. So there's a little bit of there can be a bit of a crossover there. So for women especially, I like to check their hormonal balance. So our female hormones in balance, we won't see as much of these mood-associated presentations. But when things are out of balance, we definitely can see an increase of anxiety, especially in the luteal phase of a woman's cycle. So after she ovulates until she gets her period, our progesterone level rises. And the thing is that progesterone is needed to produce cortisol, which is our stress hormone. And the more we take from the ovary to make cortisol, the less we have for the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle. So symptoms of progesterone deficiency include anxiety and insomnia. So we need progesterone to also make GABA, which is a calming neurotransmitter. So progesterone is really important. And if a woman is incredibly stressed or, has a very busy lifestyle, which is, most women I talk to, the overuse of cortisol is going to be detrimental to the progesterone level, which is going to potentially lead to an increase of anxiety and insomnia if she's vulnerable to that. So I might suggest, and for this particular woman, I would be talking, we would be talking around her hormonal cycle, trying to understand if a hormonal imbalance is a potential driver for anxiety or the anxiety presentation. So once we start improving the progesterone level, that takes that particular issue out of the equation. Moving on to the next slide. Oh, and also it's important to mention too that in a situation of estrogen dominance, we may see the consequence of that is the body not having enough progesterone to meet the estrogen. So we have a relative progesterone deficiency. So in that circumstance, what we need to do is work on the metabolism of estrogen. So doing more testing around that is going to be helpful. Okay, so this is where we get into the more the more psychological aspects of anxiety. And obviously this isn't my area of specialty, so I would be referring on to an appropriate health professional like a psychologist or a counsellor if I felt that this particular patient, their anxiety was driven by a lot of these types of things, especially not so much the top one, but especially the emotional triggers or childhood trauma. So firstly, acute or chronic stresses. So an ongoing chronic or severe stress-induced activation influences the function and structure of the amygdala neurons, leading to sympathetic dominance or that fight or flight state. So when we've been under a lot of stress, maybe we just look at the last couple of years, there was pretty much, ongoing stresses for many different reasons, many different impacts of what was happening in the world, in our community. And that can cause an ongoing situation of increased cortisol. So increased cortisol means that we're going to activate that part of the brain and the central nervous system, leading to sympathetic dominance or that fight or flight state. And then you're going to get more cortisol and adrenaline released, and you're going to see more of those anxiety-based symptoms because of what's going on there with the stress response. So the other two areas, so the emotional triggers, the thought patterns, as I mentioned earlier, any childhood sort of trauma. So these things, these internal things that are with us will then be activated depending on what experiences we're having in our life. So what's going on with relationships, or if, you experience an emotion that causes that emotional trigger, it might activate that anxiety-based response depending on what sort of thing it is that perhaps we've repressed or we haven't processed. So especially with more childhood trauma, or even, depending on the emotional regulation and responses of a child's parents as they grow up in adulthood, definitely how we have witnessed our parents or the people that we live closely with as a child, how we witness them responding to stress or their own sort of problems in life. That's sometimes how we learn that behavioral response. So it can kind of be lingering as we move into adulthood. So when you see a holistic practitioner, or you may have already been to a psychologist or a counselor, so that those types of things can definitely trigger your anxiety. So a naturopath can, if it hasn't already been identified, might be able to help you to link that your anxiety presentation is very much associated with these things and refer you on to someone that can really help you with that, while working on some of the physiological imbalances that are most likely to be going on at the same time. Okay, so this is where we get into some really interesting kind of aspects of the physiological disruptions that can occur. So this is what we can do a bit of testing around too, which can be really helpful to support the body. And when you are using supplements or natural medicine, it's important that you know, what does the body need? What imbalances are present, and what can you give, or what can we be looking at putting into a treatment plan that can help to reduce some of these physiological imbalances that are going on. And I'll talk a little bit more about the testing that's available to kind of work these things out if it's something that is going to be indicated. So the MTHFR gene mutation is apparently present in about 30 to 40% of the population. And basically what that gene mutation means is that it will influence how your body is able to activate and use and absorb B vitamins. Okay, now B vitamins are really important. We need B vitamins in the energy Krebs cycle in the body. We need them for liver detoxification. We need them for neurotransmitter synthesis. So to make neurotransmitters like dopamine, like GABA, like serotonin, we need B vitamins. We need to have the building blocks to actually make these things. Okay, so when we see imbalances with those neurotransmitters, that's when potentially those physiological influences that can lead to anxiety become a problem. So problems with folate metabolism have been associated with depression and anxiety. And these are vitamins that are, B vitamins are needed for neurotransmitter synthesis. So what we kind of need to do in this situation is find out, does this person actually have this gene mutation? And if they do, then we know what particular supplements in terms of vitamins, and they are activated B vitamins, and there can be some other cofactors along there to help those pathways, those enzyme pathways. Then we know that we need to put those particular things into place for this individual. The other one is a pyrrole disorder. So this is caused by an overproduction of, I'm just going to say HPL, because that, as you can see, that's a very big mouthful. The HPL binds zinc and B6, preventing their use by the body. So these are, again, two really important nutrients that are needed in neurotransmitter production. So the HPL binds zinc and B6, preventing their use by the body. HPL is a biomarker for oxidative stress and is neurotoxic. An excessive amount can cause nutritional deficiencies such as zinc and B6, and a history of long-term zinc deficiency can result in an increase in copper in the body. And symptoms of excess copper can lead to anxiety, depression, constipation, dry skin, cold hands, and feet. So you can see these symptoms can be caused by lots of other things too. But this is kind of like, again, that mind map or that checklist of, is this a potential issue for this particular person? Now, another thing that's interesting that we need zinc and B6 for is hydrochloric acid production in the stomach. So if you have a lack of this, you might have some digestive issues associated with low hydrochloric acid in the stomach, which may mean you find it hard to digest proteins or animal protein. You might get more reflux or burping or heartburn. And you may also have something like with constipation that can be because of low HCl. So you need zinc and B6 for that as well. So having this type of issue means that we need to look at supporting zinc and B6 levels. And we also need the body to help to excrete that potential excess of copper. So there is a particular test that is recommended to find out if this is an issue for this particular patient. Okay, so as you can see, there's many contributing factors to an experience of anxiety in the body. So it's really important that we kind of look at all of these different aspects. And when you see a naturopath, that's why we spend like over an hour talking to you about these types of issues, because we want to understand for this individual what's relevant and what do we need to look further into, or what testing do we need to do to cover off all the potential contributing factors. So there may be a genetic predisposition. So GAD is general anxiety disorder, is a condition that can be inherited. So as I mentioned before with, the childhood aspects, living in a household where parents or family members experience anxiety can further compound this expression through learned behaviour. So it might be something that you could be genetically more predisposed to if it's experienced by other members in your family or generationally. But then also that child that grows up with parents that are potentially having issues with anxiety are going to learn, their stress response and behavioural responses to external stimuli with that potential expression of anxiety as well. So that's definitely something to look at in terms of, is this common, or is there a pattern here in terms of a genetic predisposition? So adrenal dysfunction, and this sort of touches on what we mentioned before with what drives overstimulation of that central nervous system sympathetic dominance. Too much cortisol from stress leads to excessive stimulation of the central nervous system. This may eventually lead to gut issues, sleeping issues, hormonal imbalance, and energy issues. So stress and the overstimulation of our nervous systems, it's really hard to get away from that in this modern world. So even if you don't have any major stressful events going on in your life, I bet you're still really busy. If you've got children in the picture, parenting is a constant output of energy, and depending on what sort of issues you're dealing with from day to day, and depending on the ages of your child, there's a lot of stimulation for the central nervous system. Being in front of screens all day stimulates cortisol. Being in front of, having our phones and that constant, stimulation that causes, whether it's, too much use of the phone, too many notifications going off all at once, being contactable 24/7 with emails, all of that stuff is very stimulatory for our nervous system. And you top that with, trying to keep up with a busy life, you might be having too much sugar, you might be having too much caffeine. Both of those things are going to stimulate your nervous system as well. So as you can see, it's a very stimulatory world. So cortisol and adrenal regulation is really important, and trying to bring back a pace of life that is going to be a lot kinder to your adrenals. And especially for women, our bodies aren't designed to have this constant cortisol stimulation. As you can see that I mentioned before, it impacts your hormonal balance. And when your hormonal balance is impacted, that's going to impact other things too. So all those little signs and symptoms that your body gives you, whether it's in your cycle, whether it's in your gut, whether it's in your, the amount of stress that you feel you're experiencing in your body, they're all signs that perhaps you have too much cortisol. The pace of your life is not matching what your body needs to stay in balance. So sleep disturbances are very common with anxiety. So insomnia and anxiety can definitely go hand in hand. Insufficient sleep is associated with emotional and mental health problems, including anxiety. This obviously can be related to the body's stress hormone cortisol. And what happens is that if your cortisol is being stimulated too much through the day and for a prolonged period, or depending on what your evening routine is like, if it's too stimulatory, what you're going to find is if your cortisol is not lowering significantly enough for your melatonin to switch on and support your sleep cycles. So adrenal burnout due to increased sympathetic dominance can alter your circadian rhythm. So often when I see people they may experience some level of anxiety, they're also experiencing some sleep disturbance. It's not just a case of, well, let's just give you some natural sedative herbs or, combination of nutrients. And a lot of people take melatonin, but that's not actually working on regulating out the body systems that are associated with the actual problem. So we need to look at what's going on for your adrenals, what's going on with your morning cortisol, what's stimulating cortisol throughout the day, what needs to happen to help that cortisol to lower at night. So even with coffee, if you drink coffee, if you have it in the morning, you are, raising cortisol just that little bit more, which happens in the morning anyway. But if you have it later in the day, you're potentially stimulating cortisol release when your body actually wants you to, once your body wants to start lowering that cortisol to help to switch your melatonin on. Okay, and there's more. The list goes on. So gluten intolerance, there has been many links between anxiety improving once patients have reduced gluten in the diet, especially those with IBS. So there's definitely some links there. A lot of it is anecdotal reports. I know I find a lot of my patients, obviously we're doing more than just removing gluten or limiting gluten from the diet, but it definitely can be really helpful. As I've said there's no kind of concrete medical evidence available yet of the exact mechanism, but it definitely can be helpful. Nutrient deficiencies. So I already chatted about the B vitamins, about zinc. And the thing is that when your body's under a lot of stress or impacted by anxiety, you are going to use more of your magnesium and B vitamins and all of these things that help to keep your nervous system in balance. Therefore, you need more in the first place. So if you're not getting those through your diet, you can very quickly become deficient in those things. And that is going to further compound the experience and imbalance from that, physiological level to experience more anxiety in your body. And the thing is with the diet, often when a person is in that anxious state, it's very difficult to be focused and be making sure that you're eating really well and eating in balance and planning your meals and doing all of that when, you're struggling anyway just to get through the day and this feeling of anxiety in your body. So it makes it very difficult to get those good meals and balanced nutrition in. So often what I will do for patients is firstly work on trying to reduce that acute feeling of anxiety in the body. And then once things are feeling a little bit more settled and in control, then we start to really work on improving the diet and making some of those changes. So gut dysfunction, this is where the gut health comes in. Gut dysfunction, including irritable bowel syndrome. So irritable bowel syndrome, as diagnosed by your GP, and anxiety do definitely go hand in hand, strongly associated with anxiety. So when we have a condition like IBS, so commonly there can be intermittent episodes of loose bowels or constipation, and we can also see a lot of bloating and discomfort. And when there's a lot of bloating, this is usually linked to dysbiosis. So this means there is a gut bacteria imbalance going on. So there may be overgrowths of certain types of opportunistic or commensal bacteria, we call it, that can be usually present in the gut, but they can cause a problem when they overgrow. We can also see issues associated with parasites in the gut and candida in the gut that that's overgrown. And parasites are actually a lot more common than you would realize. So I do a lot of gut microbiome stool analysis, the GI microbiome mapping test. And this is really extensive, and it tests for like over 50 types of different microbes or bacterial overgrowths, parasites that could potentially be present in the gut. And a lot of these have systemic impacts. So with Candida, definitely anxiety can be linked. If you have leaky gut, which means that the gut lining, the gut junctions, or that filtration system of how you absorb nutrients is overactive, which commonly occurs in anxiety due to the effects of cortisol on the gut. And it activates an enzyme called zonulin, which is what opens the gut channels to allow things to be moved through into the bloodstream. So if you have leaky gut and then you have a gut dysbiosis or a parasite or candida, the byproducts of those microbes' metabolic processes are going to be absorbed into the body. And some of those are going to definitely aggravate a situation of anxiety or even cause anxiety. So, you know, when we're looking at someone with IBS, it's really important to work out what's driving that irritable bowel syndrome, or if they've got lots of issues with bloating or food intolerances or, you know, diarrhea or constipation. Looking deeper into the gut can be really helpful to work out, are there microbial influences here that are having more of a systemic consequence and perhaps driving this person's anxiety. And again, as I mentioned, there's often multiple things going on at the same time that are driving factors. What we need to do is work out what those factors are for that particular individual and put some things into place to balance those things out. Okay, so that's a lot of information on driving factors. So it can be, you know, very overwhelming to kind of work out, well, what is it that's driving my presentation of anxiety? So now what? What are we going to do about it once we work out which things are potentially indicated? So this is where we might explore doing some testing, okay? So there's different types of functional testing that you can do, which might be a little different to what you might be offered when you go down more conventional pathways of treating this condition. So you might go down that pathway, and you might also want to look at some of these functional things so that you can work out and understand what's going on with your body. Because remember that anxiety can be a very disempowering place to be in, very disempowering. You can feel like you've got no control over what's going on and you don't know how to make it better, or what do you need to do to get out of this place that you're in. So what we need to do is start giving you some of your power back. And how you do that is by learning about your body, learning about why is this actually happening? What's going on in my body? And what do I need to do to correct it? So we need to start looking at how we can empower ourselves to be in the driver's seat and to, you know, knowledge is power always. And it means that if you've learned something about your own body, then you might be able to prevent you having a problem again in the future. Or if you do have a problem, it's not going to be as scary because you can be, well, I kind of know what areas I'm vulnerable in. Perhaps I need to have a look at those things again. Or what have I dropped off? Or what am I not doing that I was doing that was really helpful? So some of the testing that we might look into, and how I sort of work out whether a person needs or what test they need, is by understanding the signs and symptoms that are going on in the case history or in that person's body. So the adrenal cortex stress profile, that's when I want to have a look at what are the cortisol levels doing? Where are they peaking? Where are they dropping too low? How is that affecting sleep? How is that affecting energy? So it depends on their presentation, whether there's lots we're talking about energy and fatigue and issues with sleep. That's when I might look at doing adrenal cortex stress profile. And this is saliva testing. So it's a functional test that naturopaths or integrative GPs might offer. Female hormonal balance testing. So this is where we test for progesterone levels, we test 3 types of estrogen, we test adrenal hormone DHEA, and we test the testosterone levels. So this is when we're talking about, you know, there's a lot of hormonal imbalance going on. There's a lot of peaking of those anxiety symptoms in that luteal or second phase of a woman's cycle. We might definitely look at female hormonal testing to see, you know, if we need to work on those hormonal pathways. So food intolerances, so we want to look at, you know, what is this person's body reacting to? Is there a gluten intolerance going on here? And improving your gut health that goes along with food intolerances. So the GI microbiome mapping, which I mentioned when we were talking about, you know, the IBS related stuff, that might be something that we look into if there's a lot of gut issues associated with this person's presentation of anxiety. So the other, those 2 physiological testings, the MTHFR gene testing and the cryptopyrrole testing, we can also look at if there's factors that seem to be pointing towards that. And also looking at nutrition and nutrient deficiencies. So wanting to look at if this person's actually getting the building blocks that they need to make those neurotransmitters that are important in balancing out the brain chemicals and the impacts of that. So lifestyle is really important as well, and there's lots that we can do to help to support a balanced, calm nervous system response in our daily lives. So, you know, confiding in a trusted friend or family member or an appropriate practitioner. So finding the right people is really important to help you to move through this experience of anxiety in your body. And if there's a lot of those emotional or psychological factors going on in what's triggering your nervous system, it's really important that you find the right people to help you to move through that. Making time for self-care. So one thing that I've definitely learned, because you know, I certainly have my own personal experiences with anxiety that started in childhood, and having a good routine about how I take care of myself is something that I do every day, and it's something that I recommend to my patients. So you've got to make time for that though. It's very easy just to get on that hamster wheel of life and just go about the daily tasks every day without looking after yourself. So having a really good routine and things that are focused on helping you to feel calm and grounded and in your body instead of just rushing around on autopilot can be really helpful in your nervous system regulation. So making time for that's really important. Being mindful of your breathing, so shallow breathing, even learning to meditate can be helpful. Moving your body daily. So exercise changes your energy and reduces increased cortisol from stress. So especially when we have that like buildup of stress, depending on the types of things that we're responding to during the day, moving your body can shift that energy out and make you feel a lot more grounded and present within your body. Things like an Epsom salt bath can be very calming. Journaling and having a really good sleep routine is very important. So nutrition. So we've got a couple more things to go through. So nutrition and also some of the natural things that natural supplements and herbs that could be really helpful. So the following considerations may be extremely helpful in supporting balance within the nervous system. So eating plenty of whole foods, veggies, fruit, nuts, seeds, eggs, fish, whole grains, whatever. You know, a lot of people are, you know, they might be vegetarian, vegan, or be doing whatever they're doing with their nutrition. All I will say is try to be as whole food as possible. So limiting your processed foods, making things from scratch where you can. Make sure you get adequate protein with most meals. So regardless of whether you're vegan, vegetarian, or you eat animal protein, protein helps to balance out your blood sugar, which is one of the things that I mentioned in the beginning. And it's also really important to give you amino acids that can help you to make neurotransmitters. So you need to be getting those in your diet. Make sure your meals are not based around refined carbohydrates. So, you know, this is the more convenient sort of way of eating, that we might be engaging in, especially if we're having really busy lives. So there might be more pasta, bread, cereals, those types of things. And what we want to do is make sure that we're balancing out our carbohydrate intake with our proteins and our healthy fats. So eating plenty of healthy fats, olive oil, coconut oil, avocado, nuts, seeds, omega-3s, having salmon in our diet, like all of those things that are going to give us good healthy fatty acids are going to be very nourishing for the nervous system. Limiting caffeine, gluten, sugar, and processed foods. So these types of things can be stimulatory for the nervous system. And if there is an experience of anxiety, kind of looking at those nutritional factors, limiting some of these things will be really helpful to support the balancing out of your nervous system. So eating foods rich in magnesium and B vitamins are some of those really important building blocks that we spoke about that are needed for nervous system balance and healthy function. And eating regular meals. So that comes back to that blood sugar regulation as well. Okay, so now this is not an exhaustive list. This is just a list of some basic things that can be considered. And I would definitely always suggest that you see your health practitioner to discuss the supplements. There can be interactions, there can be contraindications depending on whether you're taking medications and what forms. So it's always best to talk to someone that can look at those things for you and can tell you what it is you need. Because as I've mentioned through this evening, is that there can be many contributing factors. So you need to be looking at the right types of nutrients and supplements that are going to support what those contributing factors are. Never self-medicate, because the quality of the supplements too is going to change how your body responds to them. So see your practitioner if supplementation is something that you want to explore. So some of those basic supplements like magnesium, B vitamins, zinc, omega-3 fatty acids, amino acids, and probiotics. So again, they all relate to different areas, different pathways, and it needs to be tailored for you to get the best results and to do it in a safe way. Herbal medicine, it's the same thing. So these are just some of the basic calming nervous system supportive herbs that we use a lot of in the clinic. But again, there's different things that are going to be more effective in different circumstances and situations. And herbs definitely can have some interactions with pharmaceutical medication. So always need to discuss the appropriate use of these herbal medicines. So lemon balm, passion flower, skullcap, chamomile, oats, lavender, all of these things have a lovely calming effect. You can get some of these things in herbal teas. And this might be a place to start if that's an appropriate thing for you to be doing after you kind of get any kind of medical conditions and interactions sorted out. But the use of these natural supplements, once they need to be tailored. So if there's if there's hormonal imbalances going on, then we need to look at things that are going to help to balance out your hormonal imbalance. If there's more adrenal issues going on, then we need to use things that are going to support balancing adrenal issues or adrenal burnout or cortisol dysregulation. If there's gut things going on, then we need to use the things that are more associated with those types of presentations. So finally, remember that your presentation is unique. There is no one size fits all. So what works best for one patient with their experience of anxiety is going to be potentially completely different to what's going to be supportive for the next patient, because everyone has different drivers, different contributing factors, and the job of a holistic practitioner or a naturopath is to work out what they are and put supports into place for those particular things. So any support and treatment you receive needs to take into account your individual contributing factors and personal requirements.